Hi, everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of Recharge the Podcast. I'm David Coe. In honor of World Mental Health Day, we wanted to kick things off with a very special event, a live conversation with the 19th and 21st Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Vivek Murthy. Over the course of his distinguished career, Dr. Murthy has called the nation to action around mental health and loneliness, among other public health issues, and written several best-selling books. We hosted Dr. Murthy in Austin at our ComHealth Summit, where Dr. Murthy and I discussed why companies should play a larger and more significant role in mental health. So let's recharge with Dr. Murthy. Okay. Welcome, Dr. Murthy, and thank you for joining us here today. I can't tell you how excited we are today for this conversation. And what I wanted to do as we kick it off is I wrote a book, and the book was called Recharge. And the whole premise of that book and podcast is around thinking about your mental health like a battery. And so I have a question that I like to kick it off with always is, how's your battery and why?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Right now, my battery's pretty good. I'd say it's around maybe 70%, 75%, which is a lot higher than it was 6 months ago, and much more so than a year ago. And I really attribute that to a few things. I think one is, I think we have things that fill our tank, and we have things that drain our tank. And for me, I have been leaning into more of the things that fill my tank. So that is time with people I love, that is sleep, it's meditation, it's working out, so things that fuel the body, mind, and soul. But I've also been trying to be mindful of what drains my tank, and I need to be more thoughtful about that. So yeah, overall I feel grateful to be in a better place, and I think it's not just good for me, but I realize it's good for my family, because otherwise it's a real drag for them to be around me when my tank is empty.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, those are such important points, and I want to hit all of those in just a minute here. But I wanted to ask you now, as former Surgeon General, what's it been like over these last few months for yourself?
Wow, there's so many ways to answer that question. Look, on the one hand, I'm grateful because I've had the chance to start reflecting on what I experienced. And the thing is, my wife and I were talking about this just the other day. I served 2 terms, and in between those terms, we had a pandemic. So we actually haven't really had a break for like 12 years.
Wow.
And I realized in particular, when I came out of office, I hadn't had a single, like a true day off in about 5 years, because there were always crises and this and that and everything. And so I feel very grateful these past months to actually have some more flexibility in my schedule. I'm doing much more, sort of drop-off and pickups with the kids from school. I'm around a lot more for bedtime, and I have a favorite part of the bedtime routine for me, which is telling my kids a story, and it's a story I make up. And over the years doing this at bedtime every night, we have this whole universe we've created of characters and everything, but that is like time I truly treasure with them. So all of that I'm very grateful for. There's actually one other thing I should say I'm really grateful for, which is the issues that I worked on when I was in office: mental health, social connection, and community. Thinking more broadly about how we rethink our culture and the forces around us that shape whether or not we're driving towards fulfillment or not. These are all issues I now feel like I'm able to work on with even greater freedom than I was before.
I want to talk about a quote you said, and I want to make sure I get this right, so I want to read it. You said at one point during your second term that mental health has become the defining public health issue of our time. Why do you believe that, and why did you say that?
So I believe that when I said it, and I still believe it today. Our mental health is a fuel that allows us to show up in life, for family, at work, at school, for our neighbors. And for many people, given that we're living in a mental health crisis right now, particularly for kids, that fuel is running low. And that affects just how we show up in all these different dimensions. So if you're struggling with your mental health, and you're not as engaged or as productive in the workplace, that has economic implications. If you're struggling with your mental health, one thing I saw as a doctor, time and time again, is that we could bring a patient in who had a hypertensive crisis and figure out how to get their blood pressure down, put them on the right medicines. But if somebody's struggling with their mental health in parallel to all of that, the likelihood that they can truly engage in their health and go to those follow-up appointments, take their meds, is actually compromised. And so I started to see that mental health isn't just something on the side here that we deal with when we have time. It actually is foundational to our health and well-being. And what I worry about, and the reason I call that a defining challenge of our time, is because we are seeing mental health struggles escalate, not only in the United States, but in many countries around the world, where young people are really the tip of the spear in terms of this mental health crisis. And it's leading to higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicide. People sometimes wonder, is this all just awareness? We're just like saying, yes, we're struggling more, even though we were struggling before. No, this is all not just awareness, it's a component of it. But we are actually seeing the rates of hospitalizations go up for suicidal intention, right? That doesn't happen just because awareness increases. We are seeing suicide rates, like progress and escalate at rates that are alarming. So I think if we cannot get a handle on the mental health crisis, I worry that it will impact us in every critical dimension of our life.
And thank you for putting that as a foundational aspect of your term. For so many of us here who are leaders in our industry, we too share that. So it's definitely resonated with each and every one of us in this room. I have a personal question for you. When I was growing up, coming from my parents, coming from Korea, an immigrant family, we didn't talk about mental health in our household. But I do get to talk about it with my two daughters today, and so it's become a lot more approachable. When I was reading your book, I got a sense of your own family and your upbringing, and I was just wondering, did you talk about it in your family? Was it a conversation topic? And if it wasn't, when did it become a conversation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We never talked about mental health when I was growing up. My family is originally from India, and deeply rooted in Indian culture and traditions. We never talked about it. It wasn't like my parents said there's something bad about talking about it. It never came up. But I do remember one day in particular, like when I was in high school, when I was sitting at the dining table doing my homework on a Sunday morning, and my parents were away at the temple, and the phone rang, the landline rang. This was the age of landlines. And I went to pick up the phone, and it was my uncle who had immigrated from India just a couple of years ago. He was living in another place, in town, and he had a couple of roommates, and it was one of his roommates on the phone who said, I can't get him to come out of his room. Well, I started to get worried. I said, well, I think you should call 911. And listen, I'm like a high school student. What do I really know about how to handle these situations in that moment? But she called 911. They broke the door down, and they found that he had taken his life in that room. And I just remember it was like being kicked in the chest, like in that moment. Like what a gut punch. I was like, how could this happen? I was like trying to process it. I had to call my parents at the temple and tell them this had happened. I just remember how stunned they were. But I remember the sense of shame also that descended after that, and how my family was careful about who we told about it, because given how much stigma surrounded mental health, people would think something was wrong with our family. So we never really talked about it, in great depth. We managed the logistics around it. We felt sad, and we acknowledged each other felt sad. But interestingly to me, as I've done more work on mental health and on issues like loneliness, I find that my parents are now starting to talk to me about those topics more. Wow. In ways that we never did when I was a child. We're starting to talk about struggles that our relatives are having with their mental health. And so this is a place where I want to actually give credit to my parents, because they, like so many other immigrant parents, came to this country leaving everything behind, right? And without family, friends to lean on, et cetera, and had to figure out how to navigate a whole brave new world. And they were growing too. And I've seen them grow over the years in their understanding of these issues. And so now, yes, I feel much more open in talking to them about it.
I want to switch the topic here, because you do have such a calm demeanor. And when you were Surgeon General for your 2 terms, obviously it comes with an enormous amount of responsibility, especially during the pandemic. how did you manage and handle that stress of the job?
Oh,
Were you stressed?
yes.
Okay.
I was. There is a lot of stress that comes with the jobs, and it goes in waves, and I wouldn't ever want to pretend otherwise. I would say I did a worse job my first term, managing it. See, my first term, what I was doing is pouring myself 100% into work, thinking like, I got to put every hour here because there are all these crises, and I only have a limited amount of time to do this job, so I just got to put it all in. So when President Biden was elected and asked me to come and serve as Surgeon General, I remember going to my wife and saying, he asked me to come back. What do you think? And she said, what's going to be different this time? And she didn't mean what's going to be different in the work. Like what issues are you going to be taking on? What's your agenda? She was like, no, put that aside. What's going to be different in your life, like in the family? It was sobering because I knew I had done a bad job of that the first time around. And so we made a couple of decisions during that time. We said, like, we're going to protect some sacred times, like in our days while I'm in office. And dinner time with the family was going to be one of those.
Wow.
Drop-off time for the kids in the morning was going to be another one. Now, drop-off time was interesting, right? Because that meant that on most days from 7:30 to 8:45, 9 o'clock, I was not available. That's like prime meeting time now, right? In your government. I was like, I'll do a meeting early, but that time I've got to protect for my family, and so like that's one thing that we did. The second thing that we did is to say, okay, when you're here at dinner, at drop-off, we're going to be present, which means I'm not going to be checking my inbox all the time.
Sure.
These things, like actually, they seem small, but they made a big difference. There are a bunch of other things I did, but one other I'll tell you about is in terms of keeping lifelines, in my life to friends.
Sure.
I realized that was a mistake that I had made. I'd lost touch with a lot of close friends. So this time I said, you know what? I'm going to just start reaching out to friends, and I'm also going to pick up the phone when they call. Now, this seems like super basic. Maybe it says something about just how far lost I was. But when I was, like, let's say, walking into a meeting, 5 minutes to go before the meeting starts, phone rings. It's a good friend that I haven't caught up with in a while. My instinct would be like, let me just silence it, and I'll just find some time to call back because I need a longer time to catch up with them. And I just realized that you just keep doing that, the list piles up. The people you need to call, you never find that hour, you never get back to them, they're in a different time zone. It doesn't happen. So I started saying, you know what, I'm just going to pick up the phone. And I'm just being honest. I'm like, hey, it is so awesome to hear from you. I'm about to walk into this meeting, but I had got 5 minutes before it starts. Can we just chat for a few minutes, then we'll try to find some more time maybe later? That made all the difference. So those are some of the things that I tried to focus on that were different in my second term. And they really did help me feel more grounded. They helped me feel like I was still in my kids' lives. And I will tell you, it was tiring at times, but my kids remember these moments. They remember singing songs with me, like in the car, like on the way to school. They remember cuddling up with me on either side to listen to the bedtime story, when the lights are out and we're lying in bed, right before they go to sleep.
Yeah. It's amazing what our children remember
Yeah.
in those moments when you're actually present, as you were saying. My kids too will bring up moments or events that I will think sometimes were almost trivial, and it was a big deal to them.
Yeah.
But the thing that kind of tethered it together was around presence. Were you actually present?
And we should underscore that, because for anybody out there who's like trying to figure out how to add an hour to the day because you've got too much to do, and I think a lot of people feel that way, this is actually the secret to stretching time. It's your attention, right? And if you can be present with someone, that can make a little bit of time feel like a lot. I think for people who are leading busy lives, who've got kids or busy jobs or juggling, taking care of aging parents, sometimes it feels like I don't have time for anything. But if you just take 2 or 3 minutes and be present with somebody, and even if that's all you can give them, it will make a difference to them in a way that spending an hour in distracted conversation simply can't achieve.
I know, on a side note, that if I saw you dropping off your kids every day at school, it'd make me want to drop off my kids every day at school. So,
Well, my wife and I were the odd ones here because to us, this was a family excursion, right? Drop off. So we would both go do it together. And we noticed that almost every other family, it was one parent dropping off the kid because you're trying to be efficient, trying to like do one just drop off, one just pick up, et cetera. But we realized that for us, there was something to be gained there in all being together, especially because
you did this together.
We did this together.
Oh, you took it up a notch.
Well, because like honestly, I'll tell you this also. Like one of the challenges that I've had is, well, just to be blunt about it, it's like, how do I actually fulfill my job as a husband? How do I be a good husband? And part of that means you've got to invest time with your spouse. And that's not just time doing logistics. As one of my friends said, like when you've got kids and you're with your spouse trying to manage it, sometimes you're like, wait, are we married or are we just a highly functioning economic unit here? Like, what's happening, But the thing is, I was like, we don't have enough time to actually literally just talk and have conversation about stuff that isn't the logistics of raising the kids. And so we loved being together to drop them off, but what I also loved was driving back when it was just me and Alice sitting in the car, and for 20 minutes we could just talk, right? And so it seemed like weird and inefficient, I think, to some of the other parents in the school, like, strange, why are these guys doing this? But to us, actually, it was like a lifeline to have that time together.
Yeah. One thing you said earlier as you talk about human connection, and this became something that you talked about in your second term. It was something that you wrote about in your book, and you've been very consistent around this, is around loneliness. And then you talked about loneliness as an epidemic. Why did you call it an epidemic?
Well, one of the things that I realized is that people all across our country and the world are struggling with loneliness at alarming levels. And look, the truth is I was attuned to this in part because I struggled with loneliness myself as a kid and at various points as an adult. I never talked about it because I was ashamed of it. I felt like to be lonely meant like you were broken in some way, something was wrong with you, you weren't likable, lovable, whatever it was. And I hated feeling that way. But I will tell you that the reason that I dreaded going to school was not because I was scared about tests or teachers. It was I just didn't want to walk into the lunchroom one more time and feel like there was no one to sit next to in elementary school. Yeah. And I would fake having stomach aches all the time so that my mom would write me a note, so I wouldn't have to go to school. Weirdly enough, 2 days ago, my mother texted me this picture and she said, "Hey, I just found this old note that I had written to you for you to excuse you from school because you weren't feeling well." I was like, ooh. It was one of those times I made up having a stomach ache. I still haven't told her, by the way, that I made up those stomach aches, although I think she caught on. So I was attuned to it. I was seeing a lot of loneliness among my patients also when I became a doctor, even though, David, we never talked about loneliness in medical school. There's no course on it. It wasn't seen as a health issue. But people would come in for a blood clot, an infection, a heart attack, complications of their chemotherapy. And as I would sit and talk to them, I'd realize that a lot of them were struggling with loneliness. I didn't know what to do about that as a doctor, and that actually made me feel a bit helpless. But when I became Surgeon General, that's when I started to see that, wow, this isn't just something unique to my own life or my patients' lives. This is everywhere, because when I would travel on this listening tour that I began with, we just ask people, how can I be helpful? These stories started to trickle out about loneliness and isolation, and no one ever used those words, by the way. They never said, "Hey, my name is Vivek, I'm lonely." They would say things like, it feels like I have to carry life's burdens just all on my own. Everything's kind of on my shoulders. It's a lot to manage. Or as often young people would say, they would say, I just feel like I'm invisible. I feel like nobody really knows me. I feel like I can't be myself. And other people would say, I feel like if I disappear tomorrow, no one would even care. No one would even notice. And so then I started to surface the word loneliness in conversation. And I'll tell you, David, what was true then, this is back in 2015, I'm doing these conversations, what was true then is still true today, which is I find that audiences are so engaged on this topic because it's personal, because they know somebody in their life who's struggling with loneliness, and often they themselves have struggled, but they've either felt ashamed of it or just assumed that, hey, this is just the way life is. And so the last piece of it is as I started to realize how common this was, I started to dig into the science around it and realized how consequential it was for our health as well. significant increase in risk, for example, of mental health concerns when you're struggling with social disconnection, including a doubling of risk of depression. But the part that was really striking was the increase in risk for physical illness.
Right, the linkage.
Yeah, and that was surprising to me and to many people I encountered. And these, in medicine, like, we get quite interested if there are single-digit increases in risk. 5% increase in risk of heart disease, 7% increase. These are significant. What we were seeing with social disconnection is a 29% increase in the risk of heart disease, 31% increase in the risk of stroke, 50% increase in the risk of dementia among older people, right? These are not small increases in risk. And the mortality impact, the life-shortening impact, if you will, of social disconnection was comparable to obesity and smoking, right? Which were two classic public health issues that I had worked on as Surgeon General. And the data and the stories were telling me clearly that social disconnection was just as important a public health issue.
Right. Is that why, as you were parting office earlier this year, that you talked about community and talked about community as a prescription?
Yeah, it's an important part of it. And there was a question that was bothering me during my term as Surgeon General. And out doing these listening tours, I kept recognizing that many people I was encountering actually kept saying that they felt like something was missing in their lives. And so as I reflected on that, like at the end of travel days when I'd be in the hotel at night just thinking, and as I started to talk to more researchers about this, not just in the science, like in the traditional biological sciences, but in sociology and history, philosophy, et cetera, what I realized that there were three critical components that we need for deep fulfillment that have been eroding in our lives. And those are relationships, purpose, and service, right? And those three elements, when grounded in the core virtue of love, which manifests as generosity and kindness and courage and hope, these together form the foundation for community. Right? This is community in its fullest sense. If we really want ourselves and our kids to be healthy and happy and fulfilled, I realize what we need to do is build a life, a culture, a society, where that triad of fulfillment, relationships, purpose, and service, and that core virtue of love is actually at the center of our lives. And that means at the center of how we make decisions about where we put our time, at the center of how we decide to raise our family, at the center of how we design workplaces and our schools, at the center of how we choose our leaders. All of these matter. And that was my call in my final prescription.
That's beautiful. Those are words that we can all double click on. Speaking of the workplace that you just mentioned, I'd be remiss not to mention this because there are so many workplace leaders that are here today. You published a report around your framework for workplace mental health and well-being. And I think many of us here in this room have spent time going through that framework that you put together. Why did you call out the workplace in particular?
So the reason I did, and I will tell you, the response to that report was somewhat unexpected for me.
Yes, I want to hear all that.
Yeah. But I put that report out actually because I believe, from a very positive perspective, that the workplace can be a powerful engine for driving well-being in society. And I think that's for a whole bunch of reasons. I think people can find some, one of their purposes in life often can be met through their work. People can find great connection, at work. They can find a lot of really rich elements to their life in the workplace. But what I was finding interestingly is in the studies we were looking at, it said that 80% of people were saying that they felt their workplace had a negative effect on their overall well-being. 80%. And as somebody who has built organizations in the past and has overseen organizations, I remember thinking to myself, if 80% of my staff told me that they felt that our workplace had a negative effect on their mental health and well-being, one, I'd want to know that, like as a leader. And two, I'd want to do something about that. Like, that's not good, right? And I care about the people who I work with, but I also know that it impacts their work, right? Their mental health. And so I put that framework together because I had done a bunch of roundtables with leaders of nonprofit organizations, companies, et cetera, and many of them were struggling they were seeing this more and more, struggles with mental health in the workplace. And their question was, well, what are we supposed to do about this? So that's why I put this framework together, drawing on the best research that we had that laid out 5 key essentials for how to strengthen mental health and well-being in the workplace. And they focus on protecting people from harm, building community and connection, working on work-life harmony, creating opportunities for growth, and ensuring that people know that they and their work matters, right? And we dug into each one of these to talk about how to actually do them. And very quickly, from like when the embargoed report went out, we can sometimes tell just by the press inquiries we get and some of the public reaction whether something is resonating or not. And it was like a tsunami, like of a response. I was like, oh my gosh. And a lot of it was from people who are like, oh my God, yes, my workplace has been having this terrible effect on me. Like, thank you for acknowledging that and like sharing a path forward here. But a lot of the responses were actually from managers and from business leaders themselves and nonprofit leaders who are like, okay, I'm gonna try to see how we can implement this framework. So the framework, interestingly, became our most downloaded document of everything that we put out during our term. And I think it's important to state, though, that the entire job for addressing well-being in the country and in the world is not solely the responsibility of workplaces.
Sure.
Like workplaces have an important role here they can play, but there's a role for our schools as well. There's a role for government also to step up and do better when it comes to supporting and investing in community organizations to support well-being. And there are things that we can focus on differently as families too, but workplaces are an important piece of it.
Do you have advice for business leaders when they want to go and talk about mental health in the workplace?
Yes, it's maybe going to seem deceptively simple, but one, I think, is to be as real and authentic as possible. People may differ in how much knowledge they have about issues, but their guts are relatively sharp, right? And when we're not like real and honest about maybe what we're dealing with, what we're seeing, what's going on in our families, et cetera, like people kind of sniff that out. They know when you're saying it because you mean it versus when you're saying it to check a box. I think the second thing I would say is to lean on the lived experience of people in your workplace, right? Like there are a lot of folks at every level who at some point or another had to live through mental health struggles, maybe themselves, maybe their family members. And if some of those folks know that they have an opportunity to help others in the workplace community, a lot of them will want to help. So I would figure out how do you lean on those people, bring them in, whether it's to understanding the problem, planning to what the intervention we can do as a workplace, or to be the front face of it also, like for the workplace. And there are many things we could talk about here. Is also just to recognize that everyone's path with mental health is very different, right? And some people are at a stage where they need to hear about it, but they're not ready to talk about it. Others have been talking about it for a while, but they're having trouble getting help. Others are getting help, but they need just validation that they're on the right path. And others are getting help, but they just need a community of people who are also on that path that they can connect with and draw support from. But I'd finally just never underestimate the power of your story as a leader to shape and to move people. There have been so many times where I thought that I shared something that was fairly pedestrian, and that was almost like forgettable. But it was personal and it was real about something maybe our family was going through. And years later, I will have, people that I worked with come up to me and say, like, that made a difference for me when you talked about that. One, it showed me that you were real, and that was important to me because I want to work in a real workplace. But second, it helped me think a little bit differently about my situation or not feel as ashamed that my family was struggling. So yeah, those are some things that I would offer to leaders who are thinking about this. And I would encourage you, because look, sometimes you don't know if it's the conversation you start in the workplace that could end up saving somebody's life. Right. That is not an overstatement. That happens at times. We never know, like, the impact of opening up these conversations.
Yeah, switching notes here on the workplace a little bit. Sometimes we talk about that having that one friend at work can make a difference, someone to talk to where you don't feel maybe a little bit lonely, or you feel you have someone to confide in that makes you happier at work and makes your work a little bit more enjoyable. The workplace is absolutely changing in our mind because of our mobile devices that we carry with us today. It does feel like it's 24/7, and you have created boundaries. But for so many of us, it's hard when you're not the CEO or when you're not at the top to create some of those boundaries. So what advice do you have for folks who are on the working levels to say, how do you create those right types of boundaries between personal and professional?
This is, I think, very important. It's why one of our 5 essentials was work-life harmony, because we need some demarcations for when work begins and ends, for when we can actually focus on family. And I do think that the fact that we can work from anywhere, anytime, and be constantly available has incredible efficiencies in some ways, but it also, I think, detracts from our presence and our attention. So some of the things that we used to do, for example, when I was in office, is we would always tell people, look, we do not have an expectation that you're going to be checking email on the weekend or once you leave work or you're done with work. Maybe that seems obvious to some people, not obvious to others, but we realized it needed to be said because many people are coming from cultures where they were expected to be on 24/7.
Yeah.
The second thing that we would say often to senior staff is like, look, there are going to be emergencies. We constantly have crises, right? Like things happen in public health and for the country, and we got to be able to respond. But we also want you to have that sacred time. So here's one thing you can do is we're not going to have an expectation you're going to be checking email or checking text. But if there's an emergency, we will call you. So just put the volume on your ringer on your work phone on, and then put it somewhere else. When you're having dinner, put it in the other room. Just put it somewhere where we can reach you if there's an emergency, but you don't have to be tethered to your device and check all the time. But we found that if you don't model this, nobody believes you. Nobody believes this is actually how the workplace is supposed to be. They're like, yeah, they say that, but they're all on their devices all the time. So we would often, in our workplace, when we would go around and share before meetings, and we'd begin meetings often with just a quick share, check in, see how folks are doing. We'd often encourage people to just share what you did that was fun, non-work related in your weekend. So if you took your kid to a birthday party, if you took your kid to a baseball game, if you just decided to take a long run without any of your devices and just and to be in nature, we want to hear that, and that's not something to be ashamed of. Because sometimes people would feel like, well, if I talk about the fun stuff I'm doing, people are going to think I'm not working.
Right.
And I'm not committed, et cetera. And we try to, by example, dissuade people from that and encourage people to actually have a life.
Thank you for mentioning that again. It's a great reminder to bring up those personal stories, sometimes before we just jump into the numbers or the metrics or how the business is doing. You said something about sleep just now, and I have a question for you. How do you sleep at night? Because I will tell you, we just launched a calm sleep app, and we found was that we've had over 180 million people who have downloaded the product, but half our users today come to us because they have trouble sleeping at night.
Yeah.
And so my question to you is, how do you sleep?
Yeah. Well, generally what I try to do is I try to calm my mind before I actually go to sleep, and I'll usually listen to something that's soothing and musical. Sometimes it's music that's related to the prayers that we do as a family. I'll listen to that with my kids, actually, as we drift off to sleep. And increasingly what we've tried to do is to not check devices in the middle of the night, right? When we get up to get a drink of water or to use the bathroom.
It's so hard.
It's very, very hard.
Very hard.
It's extremely hard because it's right there.
Right.
You're like, ooh, did somebody text me? An interesting message, right? But part of the way we're doing that is to try to keep the phone physically some distance, from our bed. But I found that the final thing that has helped me with quality of sleep has actually been being more disciplined about when I go to bed, right? So for a long time, what I would do is I was a night owl, and I would sometimes go to bed at 11, sometimes go to bed at 2, sometimes go to bed at 1, just depending on how much work I had, et cetera. And then I'd wake up groggy in the morning, and then I would just try to rush into stuff. But what I actually decided to do instead was to say, you know what, I'm going to go to sleep with my kids when they go to sleep, right? So that means 8:30, 9, I'm going to go to bed, right? And then I just wake up early. So I wake up around 4, or so, and then I can go work out in the morning. And that has actually allowed me to work out regularly. So now I work out every day, in the morning, because I can do it before my day starts, before we have to get the kids ready. And physical activity helps with sleep also, right? So the regular physical activity has made a difference in my sleep. So all of these things together have helped me with sleep. And I will admit that I was one of those people who, when I was young, just thought like, I don't need to sleep. But I was like also getting sick all the time, always getting colds, always like, getting sinus infections, all this stuff. And then finally, like when I started sleeping more, like a decade later, and all those things started to go, it was like, oh, like that wasn't so good for me. Like in the hospital, when I was training, David, it was also seen as like a badge of honor to be able to like pull a call night and on no sleep and still like run a code the next morning, and rescue somebody from a cardiac arrest. Like all of these things were seen
Just
as,
that.
yeah, were seen as like, hey, this is cool. And I remember once having to work 60 hours in a row clinically, like in the intensive care unit, and being really proud of myself, being like, hey, walking out of there, be like, yeah, I'm gonna crash, I'm gonna sleep, but like, it was almost like a weekend warrior for like sports. Like this, it almost felt like, and I look back on that, I'm like, that was terrible.
I love that. I too want to protect my own sleep patterns, and so and protect sleep. I remember when I was younger in banking, and I was just talking about this with someone the other day. I took that as a pride of ownership, how little we slept, and we would work in the office. And I used to keep this pillow underneath my desk. And when I think about it today, I think about how disgusting that pillow must have been, right? I mean, literally it was underneath my desk by my feet, and then I would sleep on it. But when I look back to today, I also recognize I too was sick often, because that linkage between your mental and your physical health, it's so intertwined. And you did this series for Calm for mindfulness tools, and I'd be remiss not to talk about that. It's been listened to over 500,000 times. You're catching up to LeBron. That's up there today. But in that mindfulness tool series, you talk about technology. And what is that relationship, you think? How do we have a good relationship with technology? Because it's not going away.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do we develop a good relationship with technology?
I think there are a couple of things that are really important for us to understand about technology in our personal lives. One is to ask the hard question, what's actually serving us versus what is using us? And the second is to ask, how can we draw the right boundaries around technology in our life? Right? So in terms of what's serving us, my experience with sort of traditional social media was that, and had a hard time for a long time being honest with myself about this, but I had realized at some point it actually wasn't serving me. For every one interesting post or article I found, there were 30 or 40 other things that I was coming across that left me feeling worse about myself or about the world, or that made me more angry or more despondent. And so I came to the conclusion, this is actually not serving me. I was making excuses for staying on. I was like, oh, I need to stay on because this is how I know people's birthdays. Really? Like, is it worth all of the downside risk just because I need to remember a few more birthdays? But the second thing I think on the boundaries is really important too, because you're right, tech isn't going away. Like everyone's not chucking their phones into the ocean tomorrow. It's going to be there. But the question is, if we want to manage technology and not be managed by technology, we have to figure out, what are we protecting? So I think that some of the critical areas to protect in your life, to make tech-free zones, are meal times. When you're having a meal with other people or even with yourself. And it is actually very hard to just sit there and be like, I'm just eating. I'm just eating.
So true.
It feels like I'm wasting my time. I'm wasting this opportunity to multitask. But I actually think single tasking is the new challenge of the 21st century. And single tasking, one way of doing that in conversation is just pay attention to the person. But single tasking, whether it's in eating or whether it's in writing a letter to somebody or leaving them a voice message or whatever it is, like, you are better when your attention is focused. And even if you just choose a multitask to read a book, honestly, that is better and quite different from the experience of being on our phones, because it's very hard to single task on your phone because so much is available to us and pulls us in. But I think that the fundamental question of, is technology serving us, is the right question for each of us to have an honest assessment, in our lives about. And this is like the final piece that I just find myself thinking about, and that And I want to share with people as well, which is that this is a time when I think many people are looking at the world and feeling despair. They're worried about the future. They're seeing things changing so quickly and are wondering, how do I prepare my child for a future that I can't even comprehend, and I certainly didn't experience. And the world feels like it's rapidly shifting underneath our feet. And it feels like the tropical storm that we were in a few years ago has become a Category 5 hurricane.
Yes.
And how do you maintain a sense of hope in a circumstance like that? How do you convey a sense of optimism to your kids and to the people you love when you're feeling that way? And what I've come to realize is that the world is not going to slow down. Innovation is not going to stop. Challenges are not going to disappear. But what we can change is whether we face these alone or whether we face these together. And that is why I think that building social connection, rebuilding our relationships, and building a sense of community that we all deeply need and crave, but so many of us lack, why this is actually one of the most critical pathways that we need to walk down together over the years ahead.
Yes.
But the whole reason I put forward this parting prescription to America in the beginning of the year is because my worry is that we have given, as a society, we have given people the wrong map to fulfillment. We've told them that they have to chase certain things, including achievement and wealth and fame and power, in order to be worthy. And again, these are all important, but when I look into my kids' eyes, when I try to imagine what the future will be, one thing I know, I can't control everything for them in their lives, but one thing I want them to know for sure is that their worth is not dependent on how much they have, or how famous they are, or how popular they are in school, or whether they are first in their class or got into some prestigious college. Their worth is non-negotiable. Their worth is intrinsic, just like all of our worth is. Our worth stems from our ability to give and to receive love. We were born with that. Each of us are born with that instinct to connect, to heal, to show up. And this is a time for us to find those instincts again. And to remember that even though it may have been beaten out of us by difficult experiences or societal cues that tell us that, hey, nice people finish last, or kindness isn't rewarded, or you've got to be an aggressive bully in order to win, the truth is that the ability to reach out and show up for others, to be kind, to be generous, to be compassionate, that is still in our DNA. That is still at our core. And this journey to build community in a more connected life where we can all thrive, this is not a journey to transform ourselves into something that we're not. This is a return to who we always have been, deep in our hearts, and who we, I believe, can be once again.
Thank you for sharing that. I recognize that we are out of time, so I'm going to ask you 2 quick questions as a speed round, okay?
Yeah, sure.
You inspire so many people. Who inspires you?
There are historical figures who inspire me, like Gandhi inspires me, who fought for independence in India. MLK has been an enduring source of inspiration for me for 1,001 reasons. And the monk I was named after a Hindu monk named Vivekananda. He inspires me because his flavor of spirituality, his version and understanding of it was that spirituality does not have to be retreating to a cave and renouncing the world, but spirituality can be experienced through service, through helping others, by lifting society up. But perhaps my most important heroes and role models are my parents. Everything they went through as immigrants, all the hardships they endured, losing all of our life savings when I was a sophomore in college, having to rebuild, having to deal with so much and still always find a way to be there for me and my sisters as supports, as role models, as people who are always there to say I love you, even though they grew up in a culture where you never said that. I want to be for my kids what they have been for me.
Lovely. And what is your favorite way to recharge?
My favorite way to recharge is actually to play games. It's to get out there and just play basketball or pickleball or just any sort of game that I can play with someone just for fun is my way to recharge. And something that surprises people about me is that I'm actually incredibly goofy. I'm like, whenever I ask my kids, like, who's the goofiest person you know? They're like, Papa.
I don't see that, by the way, but okay.
Yeah. So I'm like a total goofball, like at home and with my close friends. And when I can live in that space, which I find like comes out like when I'm playing, that's when I feel good. That's what recharges my batteries.
Well, Dr. Murthy, thank you for being with us today. I will tell you that my battery is at 100%. If it could go higher, it would be. And we absolutely appreciate your time and your service and everything that you do for America. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.